You're listening to There Ought to Be a Law, the Center for Auto Safety podcast with Executive Director Michael Brooks, Chief Engineer Fred Perkins, and hosted by me, Anthony Simino. For over 50 years, the Center for Auto Safety has worked to make cars safer. Hey listeners, welcome to the #1 podcast named by Jane Perkins. That's right. We apologize for a late thank you to Miss Jane for coming up with the actual name for this podcast, because early on, I don't even remember if we had a name. And then in season 1, we're like, we need a better name. Did we have a name?
It was just the Center for Auto Safety podcast.
Not as exciting as There Ought to Be a Law.
That was a bit of a mouthful.
Close.
Yeah.
So thank you, Jane.
There we go.
Thank you for being my lovely sister.
And Jane, do you live next to a parking lot full of Waymo cars? Because this is a follow-up from last week where we talked about and linked to the video where a collection, a flock, a clouder, a murder of Waymo cars were all just stuck in a parking lot honking at each other, and the local residents complained. It's a fleet. Of course. It's a fleet. God. And so their Waymo's Director of Product and Operations, Vishay Nahalani, said, hey, we've put out an update and we're not going to have these cars honking at each other anymore. And she said, that's great. Your cars are still honking at each other in the parking lot. But hey, software is hard, and we'll discuss more of that later on.
I would like to congratulate Waymo on making it onto Stephen Colbert's Late Show. It was a nice segment, and they say all publicity is good, so congratulations, Waymo.
Hey, remember, people heard about it here first, or what source we got it from first. Then they heard about it from look, we don't do original reporting, okay? We're your weekly summary of auto safety fun. Let's go into something a little more interesting. Listeners, do you remember a topic we've talked about in the past called V2X? This is vehicle to everything. And Michael and Fred, you're going to have to jump in and clear some of this up for me. But the basic idea is that your car will share its speed, position, what it's going to do with cars around it, so we can be safer. So, for example, like if you're driving through fog, heavy fog, half the time you can't see what's around the corner or cars. And so these cars can be pinging to each other. They can be interacting with road signs, like for speed, and so this is exactly what the speed is, where a lot of us have cameras on the cars, but sometimes it doesn't actually pick up the speed. So it's a lot of very positive things in terms of safety from what I understand. And it looks like this is finally, the Department of Transportation is releasing a roadmap that will speed up the deployment of the technology. Now, I'm sure neither of you have any thoughts or opinions on such a
Not at all,
safety.
but attentive listeners will notice that collisions usually happen when a moving vehicle runs into something that's not moving in quite the same way. So the idea behind V2X is that everything around the vehicle will announce, here I am, please don't hit me. And the attentive vehicle will then know where things are and will not hit it. Right, Michael, is that your understanding of what this is? And
yeah,
also, our friends at the FCC may not torpedo it this time because they already put one hole below the hull and the ship is still sailing.
Yeah, they got big phone on board with everything now that their technology is going to be used to drive the system. So everyone appears to be moving forward, and by everyone, it is a lot of people involved here. I mean, ultimately, a lot of this is going to come down to, how fast the OEMs are getting these technologies into vehicles, because essentially this requires a connected vehicle. You can't drive around in a dumb car like mine is. You need a smart car that can communicate with the devices that are embedded in other vehicles or the infrastructure. And so the OEMs are going to be a big part of getting this out, but there's a lot of, there's potential drawbacks. There's a lot of cybersecurity concerns. Some people have privacy concerns as well. But as this system is rolled out, cybersecurity is going to be incredibly important, because you cannot have, bad actors getting in and manipulating what vehicles believe is happening around them. So there's a long way to go. I mean, the timelines that have been set out in the DOT's recent document are probably a little optimistic, I'd say. I think it's going to take a lot of time to get the states on board. It's especially all states on board with, embedding technology into every intersection in the state, embedding technology into their highways and other infrastructure. But ultimately, and I hope I'm around to see the day when this happens, this could save thousands and thousands of lives every year. You're talking about, preventing cars from colliding with each other in intersections, preventing cars from hitting pedestrians because they know where the pedestrians are, because the pedestrians can have, there's a lot of, you could put devices in baby strollers to prevent cars from hitting baby strollers. There's just an almost limitless number of safety actions that can be taken using V2X that could ultimately save, a significant percentage of the lives lost and injuries caused on our roads every year.
So in the past, I remember we talked about how the FCC and telecom companies kind of put a squash in this, saying, no, we need the bandwidth. And so forgetting that's moved past, or it looks like it's going, that big phone, as you say, is on board with this. What other limits are in the way? Because from a technical point of view, this doesn't seem difficult. I mean, there's the capacity, like you're saying right now, Michael, you have a dumb car, but I imagine your car, you can plug your phone into your car and essentially it becomes a smart car. No?
I'm sort of. I mean, it uses Android Auto. I have to be plugged in through a USB cable. That snazzy little Hyundai Kona that I drove a couple of weeks back, it was pretty nice. It communicated through Bluetooth. And I had all my maps and everything right in front of me, with no distractions whatsoever. So it worked pretty well. I mean, I love the idea of a smart car. Just it actually has to be smart, and not use these touch screens in a way that we've seen, frustrating consumers.
So here's the hook. The pressure on bandwidth remains, and for our attentive listeners, they know that you can only squeeze so much information through a bandwidth with a certain size, and there's only 30 megahertz that's reserved for this application. So there are limits on how much information can go through. That means that there will be relenting pressure from the cell companies to sell cellular services instead of this free bandwidth that's available from the government. A problem is that the bandwidth available through cellular systems always has built-in latency. So when you're driving a car, or when the car is driving itself, if you have latency, meaning a dead zone essentially, that's more than a millisecond or so, you can put yourself in danger. Now, the DSRC that was designed by the government has essentially zero latency, and also has anonymous features so that nobody will know which car is communicating. None of that's available through cellular. So what we need to do is be attentive to the FCC manipulation of basically the public inputs, which will inevitably in a few years say, well, we don't need this bandwidth for safety anymore because we've got the cellular services and that'll be just fine. So FCC will then try to give that bandwidth away to somebody else, no doubt, as they did already with the majority of the bandwidth that Congress had reserved for this traffic safety purpose. So there is a hidden problem here that 30 megahertz bandwidth isn't a lot, and migration to the cellular services will mean that you lose the anonymity, and you also have increased latency, which decreases the safety associated with this. Now, it sounds like a lot of inside baseball stuff, but it's very important for safety critical functions that require transmission between the rest of the world and the vehicle that contains your living body.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't do you any good to be approaching an intersection where someone's about to run a red light and hit your car if the communication to your vehicle to slow down or stop or avoid that is lagging 3 seconds behind.
Right.
Exactly right.
Hmm. So I haven't. I'll admit I haven't read through their roadmap and their timeline, but I imagine something like this can be rolled out like minimal features, kind of. So if your vehicle stops moving, that you can basically alert everyone around the road, so you don't have to put in a ton of information in this limited bandwidth, even with the delay.
Right.
Like that's still useful. So if there's a stalled vehicle up ahead, I mean, sometimes Google Maps will do that, but it'll also give you
Yep.
messages like, there's debris on the road ahead, and you're always looking for it, and there's nothing, because it's some
I mean,
crowdsourced thing.
hey, but at least you're looking at the road.
I know it distracts me from watching the latest
Yeah.
Jean-Claude Van Damme movie. My car time travels, and Jean-Claude Van Damme movies are recent. Anyway,
For those younger people, you can look it up on Google and it'll show you some old movies.
great. So, is there plans to do this in kind of a limited rollout, or kind of just, hey, let's not throw everything at once first? All of our dream scenarios. Well, let's just do very simple things like this is the speed limit in the area. So
There's a
things
plan to roll it out, yeah. And that goes back to the whole idea that in the future, everything will be better. So we don't need to do anything now.
Oh,
This should be a discussion that people had 10 years ago when that bandwidth was reserved, and the FCC dragged its feet and refused to license the technology so that it could use the rationale that no one's using it, so we can give it to somebody else. This could be just another move to procrastinate and obfuscate. We don't know that yet, but our fingers are crossed. It could have tremendous benefits.
okay.
Yeah, and what they're, I mean, look, there are going to be areas of the country that are going to be impacted first, and primarily in major cities where you have the infrastructure to go ahead and start deploying, some of these things on intersections. I think the goal that they've stated, by 2028, they want to have V2X deployed on about a fifth, 20% of the national highway system. They want to have 25% of intersections in the top 75 metro areas signalized. They want them V2X enabled. And they're looking for cybersecurity to begin development during that, which I don't know if that's troublesome or not. This there's a large potential for bad information getting the systems to potentially cause crashes. So cybersecurity is going to be really important as they develop it. And the DOT's also laid out how they're going to start granting states money to be able to upgrade their infrastructure to accommodate V2X. So there's ultimately I think we're going to see this spread like a lot of things do from cities outward. And there still remain some questions. I'm sure that all of our listeners have experienced problems accessing cell coverage in certain areas of the country. If there is no cell coverage in your area, then how are these devices based on that technology going to work? Well, they're not until you get coverage in that area. So and maybe there's a way for cars to communicate directly to one another when they're nearby each other without there being some kind of cells. I'm not totally up to speed on that portion of this, but
AM radio.
this is going to happen from the cities outward, it appears.
Well, what you were talking about is the cars communicating with each other is an intrinsic feature of the DSRC protocol
Right.
that was up to now the baseline for the V2X communications. What the cellular companies are trying to do is push that from DSRC over onto the cellular networks so they can increase their business.
Well, hey, shareholders of Verizon must be thrilled with V2X. No? Okay, well, kind of related to this, or some making roads somewhat smarter, we have an article from Cleveland.com about how the Ohio Department of Transportation's using radar at intersections instead of traditional street signs. So I don't fully understand this, but it seems that according from the article, the new radar system worked by monitoring vehicles from up to 900 feet away and detecting their speed and distance. The detectors look for breaks or gaps in traffic to determine the safest time to change the signal from green to yellow and then to red. And that seems amazing that the traffic light is figuring out, hey, this is when I should change. But I also see that, granted, I live in Manhattan, I also see that light never changing. So is it doing something else, or is this what's happening here?
I mean, essentially, the system is using radar to evaluate where vehicles are, so it can determine the most appropriate time to change the signals from green to red and ensure that no one is reaching. I mean, kind of the way to think about it might be you don't see a lot of people reaching traffic lights that are turning yellow, or where there's, the whole system is aimed at decreasing red light running crashes. So, and it looks like it's been really successful, at least where Ohio has studied this. They've seen, I think, something around a quarter, 25, so 25% or so reduction in crashes. And then 35% reduction in serious crashes. And, one of the really standout stats is an 83% decrease in angle crashes with injury. So T-bone side impact crashes are one of our main concerns in intersections, and this seems to do a really good job of preventing the high speed T-bone crashes. So these systems have been around. This is I guess less technologically complex than V2X would be. I think this system's been around for about 12 years, but Ohio is moving to expand it, and other states are too as well. So, but it's a really neat way of preventing intersectional crashes, and it's another thing that's relatively inexpensive to deploy and can end up saving. Its societal benefits are great when you consider the number of serious crashes it's preventing.
I'm going to put you on the spot, Michael, here. I remember reading, it must have been 10, 15, 20 years ago, an article showing that they improve safety around intersections by increasing the length of time the yellow light's on. Because that gives people more time to respond and either be like, yeah, I'm going to gun it, or, oh, I should probably stop. Do you have any idea how that compares to this?
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't know how that compares to this. I don't think that seems like it's a simple solution of just adjusting the time the yellow light is on, which is great because, I think that, it's hard to predict how humans are going to respond to that. Does that mean that when you encounter a yellow light, you can go ahead and accelerate because you're going to have more time before it turns red? I mean, humans make interesting decisions, and yellow to many folks is a signal to speed up in some spots rather than to slow down. So, at the same time, having been in a vehicle that was pulled over for running a red light when the yellow light signal was probably a second or less, far too small, I can see how short yellow lights can be a problem.
There's an intersection next to me where
it'll be interesting to see how AVs respond to variable length yellow lights. That's be an interesting software problem.
Yeah, and kind of as a backdrop to all this whole conversation really is, the V2X is the type of technology that I think we'll see saving a lot more lives a lot quicker than all of this autonomous vehicle robotaxi nonsense that's currently being floated throughout corporate America. A focus on V2X that could get average cars to communicate with each other and prevent accidents is going to go a lot further than deploying a robotaxi fleet with, that we're skeptical even of the use case for long term. We think V2X is going to save a lot more lives and should be at the forefront of the industry's focus rather than some of the other space age nonsense that we're seeing every day.
Wait, so Michael, why would you want to support something that's easy to deploy today with proven simple technology versus, hey man, my car drives itself? Like, why do you hate the future?
I don't hate the future. I just want simple solutions that can be put in place now. And this large, hundreds of billions of dollars that's going into developing vehicles that not everyone is going to use, that, have a limited use case at best. Why aren't we deploying all those billions of dollars to get some real technology on roads that can start saving people in the next 5 to 10 years?
All right, listeners, if you'd like to vote for V2X, press 1. If you'd like to vote for robotaxis, press 2. All right. AAA has another one of these fun studies come out about what happened after COVID-19 and our driving. And so we've all learned that, hey, COVID-19, world shut down, everyone started driving like a maniac. But the world's been open now for a couple of years, right? And apparently everyone's still driving like a maniac. And the disheartening thing in here is, speeding, yep, seen it. I've tried to drive through Connecticut, but not using seatbelts.
Yeah.
In 2024, who the hell's not using a seatbelt? Just to make that chime stop. I don't even know if my car will keep running if I don't have the seatbelt plugged in on the driver's seat for a while. Ooh,
Yeah,
listeners, if you're not plugging in your seatbelt, press 3. Because you're playing with your phone anyway while you're driving. What does it matter? Send a text, go buy some groceries. Wait, you're not listening to this podcast. Who's not wearing their seatbelt, gentlemen?
Well, you at this point in the cycle of seatbelts, if you're ignoring all of the in-vehicle warnings and the simple physics behind the matter, and all of the lives that are saved every year by people wearing seatbelts, and unfortunately all the lives that are lost from people that don't wear seatbelts, then I don't know how much more we can help you. But that's it. It was astounding. They say in the study the increase in vehicle occupant fatalities during the pandemic was almost entirely among occupants not wearing seatbelts, which is, I don't really have an explanation for that. Why would a global pandemic result in less people wearing seatbelts? We know there was also some, more aggressive driving, more speeding, and less enforcement happening during that time. But also, the study points out that, it really digs into who was most impacted by the pandemic and the rise in traffic fatalities. We saw pedestrian fatalities start to rise pre-pandemic. So that was something that probably was going to happen whether or not there was a pandemic. But in digging into that, they found that a lot of minority, underprivileged communities were impacted most by this rise in fatalities during COVID, which suggests that maybe the safety messaging and the strategies that have been deployed to try to boost seatbelt use are not being done so in a way that helps educate everyone. Maybe that messaging is not reaching all populations in the United States.
Shameful. You guys wear your seatbelts, right? Of course you do. Listener, you wear your seatbelt too. Okay, if you're driving right now, listener, just pull over to the side of the road, stop your car, undo your seatbelt, and go to autosafety.org and click on donate. And after you filled out all your credit card information and you've submitted donate, put your seatbelt back on and get back out there on the road and drive like a maniac. Okay, only do some of these things. Hey, let's move into gaslight. How does gaslight illumination sound? That sounds great. I'm going to start off. It's going to be a different choice for me than normal. I know everyone's like, oh, God, it's going to be Cruise again. Isn't it Cruise again? No, it's GM. GM is laying off more than 1,000 employees in their software and services division because they need to streamline it. We must simplify our speed for excellence and make bold choices and prioritize investments that have the greatest impact. So we're going to lay off 1,000 people in our software division while still pumping billions of dollars into GM Cruise. What's like? And at the same time, they've canceled their Ultra Cruise and tied it into their Super Cruise, and this just seems like, hey, stock market, we fired 1,000 people. Give us a little bump. That's what I think this is. because this either you're serious about making your cars software efficient, you've hired the wrong people, or you're gaslighting us. Which one is it, GM? That's a short one. Next.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested to hear if, if how does a company lay off 1,000 of, software specialists when they're supposedly prioritizing all of these initiatives that are completely software dependent
I don't get
initiatives
it.
like Super Cruise. I mean, are they saying? I just wonder, are they moving the jobs offshore? Are they outsourcing to a supplier? It's confusing as to why you would be cutting in the areas that you plan to develop and prioritize.
My only guess is if honestly, if they're doing it honestly, is maybe they hired the wrong people.
It could be that you don't understand the need
Yeah.
for software stress testing, which, spoiler alert, we'll be talking about later.
Hey, jumping the gun there. All right, Michael, what was your gaslight?
My gaslight also comes from General Motors this week, but this is on an issue that's currently happening out in California. I believe today is Wednesday. There's a bill being introduced that is intended to change the way the lemon law in California operates. Now, this is a bill that is taking place through a process called gut and amend, where they essentially take a completely unrelated bill that was introduced earlier in the session out there in California and have now inserted changes to the lemon law. And so this bill will not get the full, committee hearings and, the transparency that I think any of us as consumers would like to see when legislation is proposed that's going to ultimately change or limit our rights. And as we know that GM is behind this effort along with other manufacturers. And here we have Kia Floyd, who is the vice president of state and local public policy at General Motors, saying that the new measure is a pro-consumer bill that will help impacted customers get back on the road faster. Now, Anthony's chuckling because the idea that
Somebody
GM
named
is
Kia
back.
works for GM. That's what I'm laughing at.
Oh, that's funny too. No, but the idea that General Motors would back a pro-consumer bill is just complete nonsense. We urge, any of our listeners in California to contact their representatives and make sure that they know that if you're going to change a law as important as the lemon law for consumers, it needs to be given a fair hearing and go through the committees and processes that are normal for bills like this in California. And public transparency is key, and sliding an industry-sponsored bill in through the back door is not acceptable.
Shame on you, GM. Mr. Perkins, you have a gaslight nominee?
Oh, I do. Speaking of back doors, there's a group called the Automated Vehicle Safety Consortium, which exists, and they put out a publication called AVSC Best Practice for Core Automated Vehicle Safety Information. It's an interesting organization. It's affiliated with SAE, but it's not SAE. So it's kind of obliquely doing, what do they call it? Valor appropriation or something like that. But it's actually the AVSC is a program of SAE ITC, which is itself a 501c6 organization. Now, it's nonprofit, but it can have an agenda. Like the NFL, for example, is a 501c6 organization that doesn't really operate in the public interest. And AVSC is a similar organization. Its members are Torque, Zoox, Aurora, GM Cruise, Lyft, Motional, Uber, Volkswagen, and Waymo. Notably missing.
Just for 1 second, the list of those companies' names just sounds like you are reciting lyrics from a Jetsons episode. Eep, op, orc, I mean, this is. Anyway, sorry, go on.
And, well, better than the Flintstones, I suppose. But notably missing from this list are AAA, Arizona State University, Carnegie Mellon, and the Center for Auto Safety. So there's no vetting of any of these recommendations by any outside organization. So it's purely self-serving, number one. Number two, it is, let's see, what was my point about number two? It's missing academic and independent certifiers and consumer advocates. But there's only two companies who are in this list who have actually operated level 3 or level 4 cars. Those are GM Cruise and Waymo. We can kind of discount GM Cruise as a source for best practices, I think. And so that leaves Waymo as the only real source for best practices. And Waymo isn't really talking about what their best practices are. So it's hard to see how this best practice actually reflects best practices. There's essentially no operational experience that went into this, and no published information that allows them to do that. So it's pretty much smoke and mirrors. Now, the reason this is gaslighting is not only that it has very little factual basis, but the companies also use this as a backdoor into the actual SAE reports that are written out that people appropriate as standards for AV development. So it's pretty sneaky and slippery. You start with a document that really has very little basis in reality and no operational experience. You call it a best practice, then you slide it into a standard that everybody uses, like, for example, SAE J3016, which is widely recognized, and voila, you've essentially laundered bad information. It's like laundering money, except this is information, and it has safety consequences. So I'm giving my nomination to the AVSC, in particular, the AVSC Best Practice for Core Automated Vehicle Safety Information, which is available on the internet for free. And I invite people to read it skeptically.
On Waymo's behalf, they do have a sign in their office that says, "It has been 27 days since we've hit a telephone pole." So
that's, I mean, good. That's progress. That's progress.
That's pretty good. I mean, they've got some sort of standards happening there. And GM's got a different sign that says, "It's been more than 90 days since we lied to investigators about running over a human and dragging them." Their sign's much bigger.
We're still waiting for the NHTSA fine to come out on that one.
Well, I think part of the best practice is trying hard not to run over people, even when you do. So, there's some kind of progress.
Every person I've run over, I've not lied to investigators about. So, take that.
Job.
Hey, Fred, let's continue with your dulcet tones, and let's enter the Tao.
You've now entered the Tao of Fred.
This is very exciting. Okay, so one of the things that's not mentioned in this AVSC best practice for core automated vehicle safety information is something called software stress testing. So what is this all about? I'm going to ask you, Anthony, as a member of the public here.
Okay.
Have you ever gone hiking in a scenic area that's hilly and encountered a scenic overlook that is associated with a cliff or some kind of precipice?
Yes, and I suffer something that the French refer to as the call of the void, which is when you get near the edge, you have an urge to jump or throw yourself over.
Well, normal people, when they approach the edge, just as a point of reference, are cautious because they recognize that they're approaching a precipice, right? And if they approach the precipice as the same way as they approach a normal person on a normal walkway, they really need a different approach. This is, in a sense, what
I would like to point out. What I
justify yourself. Go ahead.
Is apparently an innate survival mechanism, and that I'm not actually going to do this and throw myself off, even though skydiving sounds amazing. And back yourself away. So
that's commendable. For listeners, you should note that his beard is his beard is going gray, so he's got some experience approaching this. God. Anyway, this leads me to the 5 most dangerous words in safety critical software development. Can anybody guess what those 5 critical words are?
It's
5-word phrase. 5-word phrase meaning bullshit.
free, dude.
No, not that. Michael?
Yeah, I'm a word short. I was going blue screen of death, but I'm not quite there.
That's pretty good. No, the 5 words are, it's never been a problem. So when you use this as a justification for continuing software development without testing it to see where the limits of your software are, then you've inherited a problem. And that's what software stress testing is all about, knowing where the limits are and making sure that your safety critical operation is well within the limits and you have margin and you understand what's going on. So to make this a specific example, okay, June 4th, 1996 was the first flight of the Ariane 5 rocket, which lasted exactly 39 seconds. Because what happened is the rocket was much bigger and faster than the previous rockets. They reused the software, and it so happens that they had a 16-bit register, which was capable of storing a maximum value of 32,767, and they were feeding into it 32-bit information, which was expected to be able to hold 2,147,000,000 yada 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 values. Okay, so they overloaded the memory. It recycled to 0 and started over again. This guidance system of the rocket went completely kaflooey, and they blew up the rocket, which only cost, well, roughly $500 million if you include the rocket. Happily, no person died. But the problem here is that they didn't know, they never tested the limits of this rocket with an excessive yaw of the rocket, which caused the control input that caused the memory to overload. Now, they have similar problems with the AVs, right? And the AVs are tested to certain limits. They drive down the road, right? All of the AV developers want to have time on the public highways so that they can test this and know where the safety limits are, et cetera, et cetera. But that's not how you do software stress testing. You first set up an environment where you know that the system is going to exceed the safe operational limits, and then you find out where those limits are. So only then, once you know where the limits are, can you determine how much margin you have for safe operation. So let me talk about this in terms of the AV. We know that they freak out when they encounter something like a concert letting out. There's a lot of people on the road, a lot of things going on. So some designer somewhere has got to say, how many people can the system accommodate when they're running across the road and doing all the crazy things that people do? You need to have that answer in order to say to public authorities, it's safe to operate this vehicle in the environment of people in the city getting out of a concert, for example. You need to know where those limits are. I've never seen any reference to software stress testing in any of the standards people generally refer to for AV development. Not from ISO, not from SAE, not from IEEE, certainly not from the government. But this is critical to the safe development or the development of safe AVs, because you need to know where the limits are if you're going to say that we're going to operate within the limits. So related to software stress testing is overall system load testing, where you incorporate the sensors like the lasers, the LiDARs, the radars, all that sort of stuff, and find out where the overall limits are for the system operation, including the software stress testing that's limited to the actual digital components. It's not there, folks. Nobody's doing this. In that sense, the entire AV test program is either not communicating how they're doing this safety development, or they simply don't understand that this is a part of safe development of any operational system with a computer that has safety critical characteristics. So that's what software stress testing is all about. And just to give you another example, there was an overflow error in a Patriot missile system, during the attack in Iraq in 1991. In this case, another overflow error, which had never been detected because it was based on a previous software version, meant that the missile defense system mistracked an incoming Scud projectile, which was the incoming missile. And because of that, the missile killed 28 soldiers and injured a further 98 people that were in a barracks, American soldiers. So this is serious stuff. It's not included in the standards. And please, the experts out there who are listening, if I've missed something, please let me know. But this is actually critical. It is included in UL 4600. It's one of the aspects of UL 4600 that needs to be incorporated in any AV development and certification of that software. So with that, you guys got any questions? We'll have references on the website for people who want to dig into this a little bit deeper.
So the example you were giving with the people letting out of a concert, that was Cruise or Waymo in San Francisco, where their entire fleet just stopped working. And
Right.
my understanding is the problem was even a lot simpler to test for that they didn't bother. It was the cellular networks got overwhelmed. And it wasn't like people requesting their ride-sharing apps or anything like that. It was just the cell network essentially went down, and so the cars died on the spot. And so
Right.
what blows me away is they never thought, hey, what happens if the cell networks go down? How do you
Right.
how do you not plan for that? Like, that's not a hard one.
Well, that should have been included. That should have been included in the safety critical evaluation. What happens when the system becomes overwhelmed?
Right.
What happens when you exceed the limits? So, assuming that you're going to exceed the limit at some point in some way, what happens then? What does the vehicle do? Because at that moment, the vehicle is going to have kinetic energy. It's going to be moving. It's going to have a lot of kinetic energy that can easily damage property or kill somebody. So there should be logic built into the safety management system for that vehicle that says, I know that it's going to happen sooner or later that my software is going to have its capacity exceeded, either due to a load of external circumstances or due to its intrinsic operation or design. What then happens to the vehicle? How do we get rid of this excess kinetic energy safely and make sure that the person or persons inside the vehicle and person or persons outside of the vehicle are rendered safe?
Yeah, because things like that make me think that they're missing a lot of very low-level fruit, like low-hanging fruit. Like, well, hey, what happens when the radar dies on the car? What happens when the LiDAR stops working? What happens when it rains? What happens if there's fog in San Francisco? What happens if, there's a lot of these very simple scenarios that no one, I mean, even Waymo, who is the most open, which is not saying a ton, of the AV companies, they've never mentioned any of this, have they?
Well, no, they haven't. And in particular, I checked the AVSC best practice for core automated vehicle safety information.
Oh boy.
Nothing there. The word stress never appears.
Did it result in you having a little stress? Okay, listeners.
Was that humor? We need the alert.
It was a meager attempt.
If you have to ask, was that humor? It wasn't. That's how it works.
Fair enough.
Okay. Listeners, please, I would love to hear more from people on them of what their impression. People specifically who've written in AVs is what been their impression of weird scenarios the cars have gotten into. I mean, we had Dr. Jeffrey Wishart who told us a story about how the car tried to steal his girlfriend one time. Just drove her a different route. But I'm very curious. Go to autosafety.org, click on contact, and contact us and send us a note, and we'll read it. We read everything that comes in, even the descriptions for perpetual motion machines. Please stop sending that.
Hey, I want to cycle back to the AVSC for just one moment,
Sure.
because that standard says that, quote, the AVSC, are committed to applying their experience and combined knowledge to earn public confidence in the safe operation of SAE Level 4 and Level 5 fleet-managed automated vehicles. I want to point out that public confidence is not the same thing as objectively safe operation.
Right.
So that's an intrinsic part of their gaslighting. End of speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Speaking of gaslighters, this isn't really necessarily safety related, but it's always entertaining. Tesla Cybertrucks. So the Wall Street Journal has this article about how people are spending $100,000 on these cars and they're getting them delivered and they're dirty. They're like filthy. They haven't been cleaned. It seems like the glass has overspray on them. And the owners, for some reason, people who have they can shell out $100,000 on a car, like, well, I didn't want to mention it to the dealer because there's other people around. I'm just shy. Like, what the mindset of people who buy a Cybertruck is just like, I'm very shy. I don't want to bother the dealer to clean this. I was $100,000. No, I can't do that. Look at me in my Cybertruck. It's very weird psychological mindset.
Yeah. I actually saw my first two Cybertrucks in the wild in the past week. One I caught a brief glimpse of in my rearview mirror in Alexandria, Virginia area. Another was in DC on Monday, a purple one. It looked like a nice big jug of grape juice driving down the street. And, I haven't changed my opinion. When I see one of those, I instantly think that, if you're driving it, you're a giant dick. I mean, that's just, I think that's the image that they're going for, but I'm struggling to wrap my head around the $100,000 that you're spending to achieve that status.
A giant purple dick. You're never going to find that at Piggly Wiggly.
Oh my God. But hey, they're such well-made vehicles. I mean, sure, they've had a recall every single one of them. But they're great. And I know this because Edmunds, they got another one of their Cybertrucks. They had one that broke on them and they returned it. They were the one that broke on them first. They were doing kind of performance testing. This one they were just doing for like kind of B-roll footage, and it broke again. And they got the proceed with caution, critical steering issue detected. So that's another plus in the.
Yeah, format. I mean, if you're delivering a vehicle to Edmunds for testing, you'd think it would be one of the ones that actually works. But here they've failed twice, which suggests that they're having very serious quality control issues with these trucks. It's
unbelievable. But hey, in other related Tesla news, and this is a safety related one. This is not just the sanity related one. You guys remember the Tesla semi truck? Yes.
Yeah. It is. It's capable of carrying potato chips.
Exactly. So this is an 18-wheeler electric truck that right now only Frito-Lay, I think, is accepted as a customer. And they're like, yeah, we're going to haul some potato chips. Real, because this is something we need. And unfortunately, a Tesla semi-truck crashed in California, causing its battery pack to burst into flames and spew toxic fumes over I-80. The first responders had to close the highway in both directions, and they wait for the truck to burn out. And it's crazy. The problem with this is just like any other EV fire, but on a much larger scale because the battery is much larger. So this is not your 32 fire trucks following it to put it out. This is more than 32 fire trucks following it to put it out. I don't want to do math.
Yeah, I mean, I think they said the battery is probably 10 to 12 times larger than what you'd see in a normal battery pack that's in a normal Tesla. So when you have that much more energy there, you're going to have larger, more destructive fires. Here, they shut down the entire road, and apparently it caused a lot of havoc for, I think it was 16 hours that I-80 was shut down. So that's just one more example of the difference. If this had been a gasoline powered diesel truck, it probably could have been, it would have disrupted traffic for some time, but they would not have had those lengthy delays while they tried to extinguish the battery. And you're not having to establish the same type of containment area to protect people in the area from the fumes that are generated by the burning battery. So it's there are some new kinks that have been introduced into our lives with new technology, and with the rise of batteries and the occasional fires that are going to occur. This is one of those things that we either have to get used to or push back against.
Was this a new flavor of taco chips, or was it, cyber toasted chips or something?
The article fails to mention anything about what happened to the potato chips. They might have been mesquite.
That's tragic. That's a tragic oversight.
I agree. Journalists have gotten incredibly lazy when it comes to my snack food consumption news. Yeah. And of course they can't use water. The fire department had to let it burn out because they couldn't use water, because that starts creating all sorts of horrible chemical combinations that would float through the air, like apparently hydrochloric acid.
And that runs off into the surrounding environment, which, is a problem.
Yeah, well, it's also futile to use water because it won't put it out. All it does is what Michael says, is rather than putting the toxic fumes into the atmosphere, it puts them into the aquifer. So,
I mean, ultimately, it makes me wonder if, all cities are going to need some type of portable swimming pool apparatus with a crane attached that they can just lower these vehicles into, or whatever portion of the battery they can get to, rather than spraying water. I mean, the environmental damage that could be caused just appears to be significant. And it seems like there's going to have to be a solution here to prevent the type of damage that we're seeing.
Well, LA is building big swimming pools for the next Olympics, right? So maybe there's a dual purpose there.
I was hoping LA would take a note from the French, and as the French cleaned up their river, maybe the LA would clean up the LA River and make that part of the Olympics. That would be fun.
No? You can clean up that river by sweeping, I think. There's not a lot of water there.
Okay, let's go into recalls. And you know how like Ford and GM, they felt a lot of pressure from Tesla. Like, we're going to be like Tesla. Well, Ford, they heard about how the Cybertruck was cutting off people's fingers with their hoods and not having warnings. Well, Ford's like, hey, I bet we can do that too. So Ford, Ranger, and Lincoln Nautilus models have a recall alert where your fingers can get smashed in the car window. This is over 70,000 vehicles, the 2024 Ford Ranger and the 2024 Lincoln Nautilus. The driver or passenger side windows may not automatically reverse when encountering an object. So that's not good. So little Billy and Janie's fingers could get cut off in there. To date, no one has lost it.
So this is a non-compliance with FMVS Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 118, which basically lays out some standards around the design of your power window system. This is a problem beyond fingers. In the past, we saw a lot of situations where kids were climbing up onto armrests and asphyxiating themselves by kneeling against the close the window button with their leg or arm while their head was out of the window. And we would see I believe around 10 of these incidents every year where a child was either asphyxiated and died or was severely injured because their head was getting caught in the windows. So this standard goes to a lot more than just fingers, although that's what you'll typically see mentioned in stories about it. And so in this case, Ford's system doesn't meet the standard, and looks like they're going to it's a software issue, and they're going to be modifying the software on these vehicles. And notices go out, it looks like, next month for owners who are interested in getting their vehicle fixed as fast as possible.
So how does something like this happen? Because this is not a new standard. This is not something new. This is actually written down on paper. It's been around for a long time, and they fail again at this. Is this because a lot of things are moving to software-based systems, and the software engineers these companies that are hiring are never shown the standards they have to conform to?
Well, we don't
You
know
know,
because we haven't
no.
seen the details. It could be software stress testing, like we talked about before. It could be just that they've chose a different transducer to figure out what the current was going through the motor. We don't really know the reason for this. There's a lot of possibilities.
So they say, Ford in the chronology, they say that, it was identified by Ford's vehicle engineering and validation group during validation testing on a pre-production model. So
But they
it
still went
appears
ahead
to
and
be,
sold a bunch of these.
I guess so, but it appears
Yeah.
to be related to, something to do with a supplier, I'm sure. So, we don't know exactly how it occurred, but this is a standard that's been in place since the early 2000s. So it's not as though they were caught by surprise or anything.
Right. All right. Moving on to our next recall. Anyone guess who it is? Guesses? Ford.
Well, yeah.
Oh, wait. Sorry. You wanted to continue with that? Or are you
Well,
going to take a
no.
guess?
I was going to say, it's going to be Ford this week because they have
Hey, look, you can't cheat.
they have retaken the lead in the clubhouse over Chrysler with 6 recalls that Ford came out with over the past week.
It's amazing. It's 4,595 vehicles. This is the 2024 Mustang. And this is the rear vehicle suspension knuckles may have casting imperfections that weaken the part and may lead to fracture. Uh-oh. And that's not good. We don't want that. So if you have this, you definitely want that one fixed. Because while you're drag racing the kid next to you, you don't want to be like, oh, my car broke. Uh-oh.
So basically, they're going to, owners are going to bring in their vehicles to the dealer and they're going to do an inspection to determine if, the suspension knuckles on your Mustang have these imperfections in the casting that results in failure. And if they do, they're going to replace them. And if not, you can drive off with a clean bill of health. And that recall is actually happening pretty quickly. It looks like owners are going to be hearing about that starting next week.
Well, that's a good one. Next up, Ford. 37,371 vehicles. The 2023 Ford Mustang Mach-E, the 2023 Ford Bronco Sport, the 2023 to 2024 Ford Maverick. And this is the windshield wiper motor may become inoperable. Uh-oh. So you're like, it's raining. Let me turn on my windshield wipers and nothing happens. That's not good. Because then you're sticking your arms outside the window and you're trying to wipe down the thing, but then your window's closing on your arm because you're driving a Ford Maverick, and now you can't feel your arm anymore because the window has collapsed you in there, and then you're...
You sound like you've done this before.
My arms aren't that long. I can't do it. It's not going to happen. Yeah.
Man, this is a pretty simple recall. Just the windshield wiper motors failing. For whatever reason. I don't think it's totally clear. But they're going to start notifying owners on this one as well next week. So it should be a quick fix and a very important one for anyone who drives in the rain.
Yeah. Or you drive anywhere. Next up, Ford. 1,902 vehicles. This is the 2023 to 2024 Ford Transit. A substitute bolt was used to secure the new steering column intermediate shaft to the steering gear pinion shaft. The substitute bolt may be susceptible to strip threads and bolt breakages. What is a new steering column intermediate shaft, and why do I care about it? And the substitute bolt, that doesn't sound good. I mean, no one ever paid attention to a substitute teacher. Of course, the car's not going to pay attention to the substitute bolt.
And these
Well,
were
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Michael.
I was just going to say these vehicles were they were equipped with a transit trail package, so I think they were lifted, or their suspension was modified, or their steering was modified to accommodate the body of the vehicle being lifted. So it's only going to affect 1,900 of these vehicles. But if you have this transit trail package in your Ford Transit vehicle, be on the lookout.
Well, in the old days, there was a solid shaft that went from the idler right to the steering wheel, which would puncture your chest when you were in an accident or in a front-end collision. That was bad. So they've all gone to a design where there's some angles in the link between the steering wheel and the pinion gear in this case, so that when there's a front end collision, there's no solid shaft that's going to come back and puncture your chest. So that's what the intermediate shaft is all about. It's part of that offset mechanism.
This is the collapsible steering column thing, huh?
Mhm.
Yeah.
That damn liberal Ralph Nader and his whole pull for safety things. Hey, next recall. Ford. Oh my God. 85,238 vehicles, the 2020 to 2022 Ford Explorers. There's engine fires. Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
There's some type of problem where engine oil, fuel vapor, that are inside of the engine, right? The engine block is being breached, and so these gases, vapors are leaving the engine block and encountering other hot areas of the engine compartment and potentially leading to fire. But these are basically engine failures. So this is a very expensive repair if you don't have a recall involved. So this is something that consumers should, be getting. I don't see date on this. Yeah, it looks like owners are already being notified about this. And Ford appears to be moving pretty quick. And they've also put in, they've got a reimbursement plan for people who have already had engine failures on these vehicles. Let's see. Okay, here's a note for owners as well that's important. The parts and software for this one are expected to be available in the second quarter of 2025. So you're going to have a long wait. Even though the notifications have gone out of the recall, it looks like parts to repair these problems aren't going to be available for at least 8 months or so.
So what would this be, a do not drive situation?
They haven't issued a do not drive warning. And they expect it's going to be a software update in the end. Mm-hmm. And if they do detect a problem, or they do detect a rod bearing failure, which is at the center of this issue, dealers will replace your engine long block, but that's only if the failure is detected. So this seems
that failure will be detected very, very quickly. Yeah. I can guarantee that it will.
No kidding.
So for our attentive listeners, if you hear a giant bang in front of your car, followed by hot oil spewing onto hot parts, causing smoke and flames to emerge from under your hood, please be advised you should stop the car and try to get out of it.
Yeah, unless you're being in a Mad Max type environment, then you just got to floor it. You just got to go as far as you can.
Okay, where's that?
I don't know. So did Ford just are they collecting all these all year round, and they're like, hey, no one's paying attention in August, let's just put them all out now?
That's a huge concern, and something that I think should be brought up here. How is it that all of these recalls are clustered? NHTSA has I believe it's 5 days from the time that a manufacturer determines it has a defect in a vehicle, it has to report it to NHTSA as a recall. And when you see a manufacturer come out with multiple recalls like this at once, it's pretty clear that the manufacturer is, conducting a meeting, maybe quarterly, maybe every month, and they're coming together and saying, okay, here are the safety problems. We need to decide what we're going to do about these things. So it's in many cases, the manufacturers aren't notifying NHTSA when, on the date they've actually determined or figured out that there's a defect. They're notifying NHTSA on the date at which they've brought all of those concerns to the attention of whoever makes this decision at Ford, and they said, okay, we want to do a recall now. It really does call into question just how accurate manufacturers are being when it comes to the reporting of defects. I mean, I see similar behavior, I think, from Chrysler and some other manufacturers you'll see that report multiple recalls at once, which, should set off red flags in the mind of anyone that expects manufacturers to report defects as soon as they've discovered them.
Hey, we only have a safety meeting once a year, okay?
Yeah.
We don't, and it all happens. It happens in August while everybody's on vacation. I had no idea. Hey, there's other news stories going on, so we just kind of slip in there and no one pays
Yeah,
attention.
let's slip all these recalls in right between the Republican and Democrat convention when all this mess is going on.
Exactly. But thanks to intrepid listeners and donors like you, we'll keep talking about it. Last recall. Not Ford. Hey, BMW, 720,000 plus vehicles. Oh God, why do they, BMW, you make good cars, kind of. Like, why do you come up with these horrible names? The X1 S-Drive 28i.
You're never going to get through the whole list.
No, I'm not going to do.
Just quit.
This is just like,
It's a lot of BMWs.
If you got a BMW, just, realize, hey, maybe put your collar down. Try not drinking bottled water. Try, listening to something else besides Steely Dan Asia. Great album, by the way. But expand your taste palette, and stop driving that way you do. But this is a water pump issue.
Yeah, this is a water pump that isn't sealed properly, and so it allows water to migrate through the electrical connector to the water pump and disrupt the vehicle's electrical system. It looks like it causes a short and can produce a fire, So it's a lot of BMWs, and it looks like they're going to be replacing the water pump if they find a leak, and also installing a shield to prevent any fluid that does leak from the pump to get into the electrical system of the vehicles.
So, hey, listeners, that's it for us this week. And I know you listen to the show, you pay attention to your recall notices, you don't ignore them. But I know you've got friends and family who are just like, no way, man. And then I apologize for sneezing there. Hopefully I edited that out and edited out my apologizing for this. Anyway, clearly I'm not going to. But to let your friends and families know that, like, hey, open your recall notices. They're not trying to sell you anything. Get this stuff fixed. Get it taken care of. Wear your seatbelt.
Just go to NHTSA's website and type in your license plate, and they'll tell you everything you need to know about open recalls.
Exactly.
And what is that NHTSA website, Michael? How do people find that?
HigglyWiggly.com. Oh, sorry.
If you just type in nhtsa.gov on their homepage, you will see a check for recall with the license plate number staring you in the face.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, listeners. Till next week.
Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Bye, everybody.
For more information, visit www.autosafety.org.